The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Jake Morrison's studio apartment, casting shadows across the cramped space that somehow felt warm when Victoria was in it. She lay beside him, her blonde hair spread across the pillow they shared, looking ethereal despite the modest surroundings. Jake traced his finger along her bare shoulder, marveling at how someone so beautiful had chosen him. "What time is your shift today?" Victoria murmured, her eyes still closed. "4 to midnight," Jake replied, pressing a gentle kiss to her neck. "Same as always." Victoria's eyes opened, and he caught a flicker of something, disappointment, maybe annoyance, before she smiled. "Right. Security guard hours." Jake felt the familiar knot in his stomach. They'd been together for 8 months, and lately these little comments had become more frequent. He tried to push away the unease, focusing instead on the laptop on his desk, covered in coding books and business plan drafts. One day, things would be different. One day, she'd understand what he was building. "I'm making progress on the app," he said softly, pulling her closer. "The security protocol I've been working on, it could revolutionize how companies protect their data." Victoria turned in his arms, her expression softening. For a moment, she was the woman who used to listen to his dreams with wonder. "I know you're smart, Jake, really smart. But sometimes I wonder if you're being realistic about the timeline." He kissed her forehead, inhaling her expensive perfume, one of the few luxuries she allowed herself while dating him. "Just give me a little more time. I promise I'll make it worth the wait." That evening, Jake arrived at Meridian, the upscale restaurant Victoria had insisted on for their dinner date. He'd stretched his budget thin for this place, wanting to give her something special. The hostess looked him up and down, clearly noting his department store dress shirt and worn shoes, before reluctantly leading him to the table. Victoria was already there, stunning in a black dress that probably cost more than Jake made in 2 weeks. She'd been getting her nails done, her hair styled, all the things that reminded him of the life she wanted, the life he couldn't yet provide. "You look incredible," Jake said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "Thank you." Her smile felt distant. "I ordered wine. The good stuff." As they settled into dinner, Victoria seemed distracted, checking her phone frequently. Jake tried to engage her with stories from work, updates on his app development, plans for their weekend together, but her responses grew shorter, her attention elsewhere. "Jake," she said suddenly, setting down her wine glass, "we need to talk." The words hit him like ice water. "What's wrong?" Victoria glanced around the restaurant, then back at him. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about us, about where this is going." "I love where this is going," Jake said, reaching for her hand. "I know things are tight right now, but once my app launches, that's just it." Victoria pulled her hand away. "It's always once the app launches or when things take off. But Jake, you're 28 years old, working as a security guard, living in a studio apartment. When is this magical transformation supposed to happen?" The restaurant seemed to grow quieter around them, or maybe Jake's hearing was narrowing to just her voice. "I'm working on something real, Victoria. Something that could change everything. Richard Blackwood asked me out last week," she said, the words dropping like a bomb between them. "He's a partner at Blackwood Investments. He drives a Tesla, owns a penthouse in the financial district." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. "Richard Blackwood?" "I told him no, obviously, because I'm with you." She paused, her eyes cold. "But he made me realize something. I'm 26 years old. I'm beautiful, I'm smart, I have a good job. I could have anyone." "You have me," Jake whispered. Victoria laughed, a sound that cut through him like glass. "Jake, sweetie, you work nights watching empty buildings. You can barely afford to take me to dinner without checking your bank account. I deserve someone who can give me the life I want. Someone who's already successful, not someone chasing pipe dreams." The entire restaurant seemed to be watching now. Jake felt his face burning, his hands trembling. "Victoria, please." "I'm sorry," she said, standing up and gathering her purse. "You're a good man, Jake, but you're not the man for me. I need someone who can match my ambition, my lifestyle, someone worthy of what I have to offer." She left him sitting there, alone at a table for two, surrounded by the wreckage of his dignity and a check he could barely afford. The waiter approached, tentatively, clearly having witnessed the scene. Jake paid the bill with his credit card, knowing it would push him dangerously close to his limit. He walked home through the city streets, Victoria's words echoing in his mind. "Someone worthy of what I have to offer." Back in his studio apartment, Jake sat on the bed that still smelled like her perfume. On his desk, his laptop waited, surrounded by books on entrepreneurship, coding manuals, and business plans covered in coffee stains and desperate scribbles. For a moment, he considered closing it all, accepting that maybe Victoria was right. Instead, he opened the laptop and began to type. "You want to see Worthy?" he whispered to the empty room. "I'll show you Worthy." 18 months had transformed Jake Morrison into a different man. His body had grown leaner from the relentless schedule, security shifts at night, coding during the day, weekend gigs doing IT support for small businesses. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but there was something new there too, an unshakable determination that burned like a quiet flame. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Elena's Corner, the small coffee shop that had become Jake's second home. Elena Rodriguez emerged from behind the counter, carrying a steaming cup and wearing that gentle smile that had become the best part of his days. "Double shot, extra strong," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "You look like you need it." Jake looked up from his laptop, fingers still hovering over the keyboard. "Thanks. You don't have to keep doing this, you know. Giving me free coffee, letting me camp out here all day." Elena's dark eyes sparkled with warmth. "Maybe I like having you around. You're much better company than Mrs. Henderson complaining about her neighbor's dog." For the first time in weeks, Jake felt himself smile genuinely. Elena had that effect on him. She made the grinding exhaustion feel worthwhile. Where Victoria had seen failure, Elena saw potential. Where Victoria had demanded immediate results, Elena offered patient encouragement. "How's the app coming?" she asked, nodding toward his screen filled with lines of code. "Getting close to beta testing," Jake said, his voice carrying a hint of excitement he tried to suppress. "The security protocols are finally working the way I envisioned. Companies are going to be able to protect their data in ways they never imagined." Elena leaned forward, genuinely interested. "Tell me more." As Jake explained his vision, the complex algorithms that could predict and prevent cyber attacks, the user-friendly interface that made enterprise-level security accessible to smaller businesses, Elena listened with the kind of attention Victoria had never given his dreams. When he finished, Elena reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "You're going to change everything," she said simply. "I can see it." The touch of her fingers sent warmth through Jake's chest. Over the past few months, their friendship had deepened into something more precious than he'd dared hope for. Elena knew about Victoria, about the humiliation, about the nights when the rejection still stung. But she also saw the man Jake was, becoming, driven, focused, unstoppable. "Elena," Jake started, but she squeezed his hand gently. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." Their first kiss happened right there in the coffee shop, soft and sweet and full of promise. Unlike the passionate but ultimately hollow connection he'd had with Victoria, this felt real, built on respect, shared dreams, and genuine affection. Meanwhile, across town, Victoria Sterling stood in the marble-floored lobby of Blackwood Investments, admiring her reflection in Richard's office windows. The penthouse view was spectacular, the lifestyle intoxicating. Richard had swept her into a world of private jets, exclusive restaurants, and designer everything. But as she watched him bark, orders at his assistant over the phone, something cold settled in her stomach. Richard's success was real, his wealth undeniable, but there were cracks in the facade. The way he dismissed people he considered beneath him, the cruel comments about losers and failures, the drinking that started earlier each day. "Darling," Richard said, hanging up and pulling her close with possessive hands. "Cancel your lunch plans. We're flying to Miami for the weekend." Victoria melted into his embrace, pushing away her doubts. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? Security, luxury, respect. Not some security guard with impossible dreams and empty pockets. But sometimes, late at night when Richard was passed out beside her, she found herself wondering what Jake was doing, whether he was still chasing his app idea, whether he ever thought of her. Back at Elena's shop, Jake was packing up his laptop as closing time approached. His phone buzzed with a notification that made his heart race, his first major client inquiry. A mid-sized tech company had heard about his security software through a contact at one of his weekend gigs. "Elena," he called out, unable to contain his excitement. "You need to see this." She hurried over, wiping her hands on her apron. As Jake showed her the email, a request for a demo, mention of a substantial contract, her face lit up with pride. "Jake, this is huge!" "It's just one client," he said, but he was grinning. "It's the first of many," Elena said firmly. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "I believe in you. I've always believed in you." This time their kiss was deeper, full of celebration and hope. Jake pulled her close, marveling at how different this felt from anything he'd experienced with Victoria. Elena loved him not for what he might become, but for who he was right now. Driven, determined, worthy of love, even in his studio apartment with his second-hand furniture. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too," she whispered back. That night, as Jake worked on preparing his demo presentation, he thought about Victoria's words at that restaurant. "Someone worthy of what I have to offer." He'd spent months letting those words fuel his anger, his determination to prove her wrong. But now, with Elena's belief in him and this first real opportunity in front of him, Jake realized something had shifted. This wasn't about Victoria anymore. This was about building something meaningful, something that mattered. This was about becoming the man he'd always known he could be, not to win back someone who'd never truly valued him, but to create a life worth living. The app that would eventually become SecureCore Technologies was born that night in a studio apartment filled with love, hope, and the quiet determination of a man who'd finally found someone who saw his worth. 2 years after that devastating dinner, Jake Morrison stood in the gleaming conference room of SecureCore Technologies, watching his team of 12 developers work on their latest breakthrough. The modest office space buzzed with the energy of a company on the verge of something extraordinary. "Jake, the Mitchell Industries contract came through," announced Lisa, his operations manager, bursting through the door with barely contained excitement. "They're signing for the full enterprise package. That's $15 million over 3 years. Jake felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with each victory. SecureCore had grown from his desperate late-night coding sessions into a legitimate force in cybersecurity. Major corporations were not just taking meetings. They were competing for his services. "Schedule a celebration lunch for the team," Jake said, straightening his tailored suit jacket. The expensive fabric felt natural now, though he still remembered the weight of that worn department store shirt from 2 years ago. "Make sure Elena can join us." At the mention of Elena, Jake's expression softened. She'd been with him through every sleepless night, every small victory, every moment of doubt. Her coffee shop had become profitable enough to open a second location, partly due to the networking connection she'd made through Jake's growing business circles. That evening, Jake arrived home to the downtown loft he and Elena shared, a far cry from his old studio, but still modest compared to what he could now afford. He preferred investing everything back into the company, building something that would last. Elena was in the kitchen, her dark hair pulled back as she prepared dinner, looking as beautiful as ever in simple jeans and one of his old t-shirts. "Congratulations on Mitchell Industries," she said, turning to embrace him. "Lisa called to tell me the news." Jake lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the kitchen. "We did it, Elena. We actually did it. You did it," she corrected, but Jake shook his head. "We. None of this happens without you believing in me when everyone else saw a failure." Their kiss was passionate, full of celebration and deep, abiding love. Jake carried her to their bedroom, making love to her with a tenderness and intensity that spoke of shared dreams finally becoming reality. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Elena traced patterns on his chest. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Not because of the money or the success, because you never gave up on who you knew you could become." "I almost did," Jake admitted, thinking of those dark nights after Victoria left him. "If it wasn't for you, you would have found your way," Elena said firmly. "Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe the path would have been different, but Jake, you have something inside you that was always going to win." Meanwhile, across the city, Victoria Sterling's world was beginning to crumble in ways she couldn't yet fully comprehend. Richard's investment firm was hemorrhaging money due to his increasingly reckless decisions and drinking problem. The penthouse lifestyle continued, but there were signs. Hushed phone calls, angry creditors, the way Richard's charm was turning into something uglier. "We need to talk about expenses," Richard said one evening, his words slurred with expensive scotch. "Maybe you could contribute more? Your job pays well enough." Victoria looked up from her laptop where she'd been browsing vacation destinations. "Contribute? Richard, you said you wanted to take care of me." "Things change," he snapped, and for the first time, Victoria saw something frightening in his eyes. "Maybe it's time you started pulling your weight instead of just being decorative." The words stung more than Victoria cared to admit. She'd built her identity around being worthy of a successful man's devotion, but what happened when that success was an illusion? That same night, unable to sleep, Victoria found herself doing something she'd sworn she wouldn't do, searching for Jake online. What she found made her hands tremble as she scrolled through article after article. Rising star in cybersecurity, Secure Core Technologies lands major contracts. From night shift to entrepreneurial success, the Jake Morrison story. Young CEO's innovative approach revolutionizes data protection. The photos showed a man transformed, not just by success, but by confidence, by purpose. Jake wore expensive suits now, but more than that, he wore success like it belonged to him. In several photos, a beautiful Latina woman stood beside him, identified as Elena Rodriguez, his partner and fellow entrepreneur. Victoria stared at Elena's face, kind, intelligent, genuinely happy. The way she looked at Jake in the photos was unmistakable. Complete adoration and respect. It was the way Victoria had never looked at Jake, the way she'd never allowed herself to see his potential. "What are you looking at?" Richard's voice made her jump. He stood behind her, swaying slightly, looking at the laptop screen with bloodshot eyes. "Nothing," Victoria said quickly, closing the browser. "Jake Morrison," Richard read from the browser history with a cruel laugh. "Isn't that your ex-boyfriend, the security guard?" "It was nothing," Victoria repeated, but her voice shook. "Looks like your little nobody made something of himself," Richard said, his tone turning vicious. "While you settled for me. How does that feel, Victoria? Knowing you threw away the one who actually had potential?" The words hit like physical blows. Richard had never spoken to her this way before, but the alcohol and financial pressure were revealing his true nature. As he stumbled away, muttering more cruel observations, Victoria sat alone with her laptop, staring at images of the life she'd walked away from. In Jake's loft, he and Elena were planning their next moves, not just for the company, but for their life together. Jake had been carrying an engagement ring for weeks, waiting for the right moment. "The Forbes interview is next week," Elena said, curled against his side. "Are you nervous?" "About the interview?" "No," Jake said, his hand unconsciously moving to the ring box in the nightstand drawer. "About other things?" "Absolutely." Elena looked up at him with curious eyes, but Jake just kissed her forehead. Soon, he thought. Soon he'd ask her to marry him, to build an empire together, to prove that real love and success could coexist. The man Victoria had called unworthy was about to become one of the most successful entrepreneurs of his generation. And he was going to do it with a woman who'd seen his worth from the very beginning. 3 years after Victoria Sterling had walked out of his life, Jake Morrison stood at the podium of the New York Stock Exchange, his hand resting on the ceremonial bell. Beside him, Elena Rodriguez, now Elena Morrison, wore a stunning blue dress and a smile that outshone every camera flash in the room. "Ready, Mrs. Morrison?" Jake whispered, his voice carrying a mixture of triumph and disbelief. "Let's make history, Mr. Morrison," Elena replied, her eyes sparkling with pride. Together, they rang the opening bell as Secure Core Technologies went public. The IPO had been oversubscribed by 400%, valuing the company at $1.2 billion. Jake, who owned 60% of the shares, had officially become one of the youngest billionaires in the cybersecurity industry. The celebration that followed was everything Jake had never dared to dream. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was filled with investors, tech luminaries, and media representatives. Elena moved through the crowd with natural grace, her hand never leaving Jake's arm, her presence grounding him in the surreal reality of his success. "Jake Morrison, Forbes wants an exclusive," announced his publicist, but Jake waved her away. "Later," he said, pulling Elena onto the dance floor. "Right now, I just want to dance with my wife." Their wedding 6 months earlier had been everything. Victoria's imagined wedding wasn't. Intimate, genuine, filled with people who loved them for who they were, not what they represented. Elena had worn her grandmother's dress, altered to perfection, and Jake had cried openly when she walked down the aisle of the small church where they'd first held hands during a community volunteer event. Now, as they swayed to the music, Jake marveled at how different this felt from every fantasy he'd once had about proving Victoria wrong. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about building something real with someone who'd always believed in him. "Remember when you used to work on the app in my coffee shop?" Elena murmured against his ear. "All those nights when you looked so tired I thought you might fall asleep in your laptop? I remember you bringing me free coffee and pretending it was a promotional offer," Jake laughed, "even though I was your only customer half the time." "I believed in you before you believed in yourself," Elena said, pulling back to look into his eyes. "That's never going to change." Meanwhile, miles away in a cramped studio apartment that looked remarkably like Jake's old place, Victoria Sterling sat on a mattress on the floor, staring at her phone screen. The live stream of the Secure Core IPO celebration played on repeat, showing Jake and Elena's triumphant moment at the stock exchange. Her fall had been as spectacular as Jake's rise. Richard's investment firm had collapsed 6 months earlier amid accusations of fraud and embezzlement. He'd fled the country, leaving Victoria with nothing, no savings, no assets, and a reputation tainted by association. She'd lost her marketing, job, her apartment, her entire social circle. The woman who had once declared Jake unworthy now worked 3 part-time jobs, waitressing at a diner, cleaning offices at night, and walking dogs for wealthy clients who treated her like she was invisible. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now worked the same kinds of jobs she'd once looked down on Jake for having. Victoria's phone buzzed with a notification, a friend from her old life sharing a Society page article about the Morrison wedding. A tech love story. The photos showed Jake and Elena's wedding, their faces glowing with genuine happiness. Elena's dress was elegant but simple, the ceremony clearly focused on love rather than display. Victoria scrolled through the photos with masochistic fascination. There was Jake, handsome in his tuxedo, but somehow more attractive because of the way he looked at Elena, like she was the most precious thing in the world. There was Elena, radiant not because of expensive jewelry or designer makeup, but because of pure, uncomplicated joy. "They look so happy," Victoria whispered to her empty apartment. And for the first time since Richard's betrayal, she felt something other than self-pity. She felt genuine regret. Her phone rang, another creditor, another bill she couldn't pay. Victoria declined the call and continued staring at the wedding photos. In one image, Jake was helping Elena with her train, his expression tender and protective. Victoria remembered how he used to look at her sometimes. In the quiet moments, she'd been too focused on what he couldn't give her to appreciate what he could. "Mrs. Morrison," she said aloud, testing the sound. Victoria Morrison. It could have been her name, her life, her happiness. Instead, she'd chosen Richard's flash and status over Jake's substance and devotion. Back at the plaza, Jake stepped away from the celebration to take a call from his mother, who'd watched the IPO coverage from her home in Ohio. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father would be so proud, too." "Thanks, Mom. I wish you could have been here. I was there in spirit. And Jake? That wife of yours, she's special. Hold on to her." Jake looked across the ballroom at Elena, who was engaged in animated conversation with their lead developer. Her face lit up with genuine interest in the technical details most people found boring. "I plan to, Mom. Forever." As Jake rejoined the celebration, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the ballroom mirrors. The man looking back at him bore little resemblance to the broken security guard Victoria had left at that restaurant table. This man stood tall, confident, surrounded by people who respected and valued him, but more importantly, this man was loved, truly, completely loved, by a woman who'd seen his potential when he was still sleeping on a mattress on the floor and working nights for minimum wage. Victoria had been right about one thing. She had deserved someone worthy of what she had to offer. But she'd been catastrophically wrong about who that someone was. Jake Morrison had always been worthy. She'd simply been too blind to see it. Now, as Jake Morrison, the billionaire CEO, danced with his brilliant, beautiful wife at their IPO celebration, Victoria Sterling sat alone in her studio apartment. Finally, understanding the magnitude of what she'd thrown away. The empire was built. The love was real. And Victoria was nothing more than a painful memory that had shaped Jake into the man he was always meant to become. 5 years after Victoria Sterling had called Jake Morrison unworthy, she found herself adjusting the black vest of her catering uniform outside the Grand Meridian Hotel. The annual Tech Philanthropy Gala was the city's most exclusive charity event, and Victoria was part of the serving staff. Invisible, forgettable, a far cry from the guest she might have been in another life. Inside the opulent ballroom, Jake Morrison commanded the room without effort. At 33, he'd grown into his success with remarkable grace. Secure Core Technologies now employed over 3,000 people globally, and Jake's personal worth had exceeded $2 billion. But more than wealth, he radiated the quiet confidence of a man who'd built something meaningful. Elena stood beside him, breathtaking in a midnight blue gown that complemented her natural elegance. She'd evolved alongside Jake's empire, her coffee business expanding into a chain of community-focused cafes that provided job training for at-risk youth. Together, they'd become the city's most beloved power couple, not for their wealth, but for their genuine commitment to lifting others. Ladies and gentlemen, Jake addressed the crowd of philanthropists and tech leaders. 5 years ago, SecureCore started with a simple belief that everyone deserves protection. Tonight, we're announcing our largest initiative yet, the Morrison Foundation's commitment to provide free cybersecurity training and services to nonprofits and small businesses. Because success means nothing if we don't use it to build others up. The applause was thunderous. Elena squeezed Jake's hand, her pride evident to everyone watching. This was their life, built on shared values, mutual respect, and a love that had only deepened with time. Victoria watched from the service corridor, her hands trembling as she arranged champagne flutes on her tray. She'd known Jake would be here. It was his event, his foundation's launch. What she hadn't expected was how completely he'd transformed, how natural he looked in this world of influence and impact. "Sterling, table 12 needs champagne," barked the catering supervisor, snapping Victoria back to reality. Victoria nodded, lifted her tray, and walked into the ballroom. She kept her head down, moving efficiently between tables, invisible to the wealthy guests discussing deals and donations. This was her life now, serving people who lived the life she'd once thought she deserved. She was refilling glasses at table 15 when she heard a familiar laugh. Jake and Elena had moved to the adjacent table, greeting donors with warmth and genuine gratitude. Victoria froze, champagne bottle suspended mid-pour. "Thank you so much for your support," Elena was saying to an elderly philanthropist. "The youth program wouldn't be possible without partners like you." Jake's attention drifted across the room, his eyes scanning the crowd with the practiced ease of someone comfortable in his success. Then his gaze stopped. Their eyes met for the first time in 5 years. Victoria felt the world tilt. Jake's expression didn't change dramatically, a slight widening of his eyes, a pause in his conversation, but she saw the moment of recognition. For a heartbeat, she glimpsed something that might have been surprise, or perhaps pity. Then Elena touched his arm, drawing his attention back to their conversation, and the moment passed. Victoria finished serving the table on autopilot, her mind reeling. Jake looked so much older, but in the best possible way, mature, confident, genuinely content. Elena was even more beautiful in person, but it was her obvious intelligence and warmth that made Victoria feel hollowed out inside. Later, as Victoria collected empty glasses near the kitchen doors, she found herself face to face with Jake. He'd approached quietly, away from the crowd, Elena momentarily distracted by a conversation with the mayor. "Victoria," he said simply. "Jake." Her voice came out as a whisper. "Congratulations on everything, the company, the foundation, your marriage." Jake studied her face with the same intensity he'd once reserved for his coding problems. "Thank you. How are you doing?" The question was asked with genuine concern, and somehow that made everything worse. Victoria laughed bitterly. "I'm serving champagne at events I used to attend as a guest. How do you think I'm doing?" Jake's expression softened with something that might have been sympathy. "I heard about Richard, about what happened. I'm sorry." "Are you?" Victoria asked, then immediately regretted the challenge in her voice. "Yes," Jake said simply. "I never wanted you to be hurt, Victoria, even after everything." Elena appeared, at Jake's side then, slipping her hand into his with the unconscious ease of 5 years of marriage. "Is everything all right?" "Elena, this is Victoria Sterling," Jake said carefully, "an old friend." Elena extended her hand with a genuine smile, having no idea she was meeting the woman who'd once broken her husband's heart. "It's lovely to meet you, Victoria. Are you in tech as well?" Victoria looked at Elena's kind face, her obvious love for Jake, the way she fit so perfectly at his side. This woman had everything Victoria had thrown away, not just the wealth and status, but Jake's complete devotion, his respect, his partnership in building something meaningful. "No," Victoria managed. "I'm between careers right now." "I see. Well, if you're ever interested in hospitality management, my coffee company is always looking for talented people," Elena said warmly. The offer was made with complete sincerity, with no knowledge that she was offering charity to the woman who'd once called her husband unworthy. Victoria felt tears threatening. "That's very kind, but I should get back to work," Victoria said quickly. Jake nodded, his expression unreadable. "It was good to see you, Victoria. I hope things get better for you." As they walked away, Victoria heard Elena ask quietly. She seemed upset. "Do you think we should—" "She'll be fine," Jake replied, his arm sliding around his wife's waist. "She's stronger than she knows." Victoria watched them rejoin the gala, saw how naturally Jake commanded respect, how lovingly Elena supported him, how perfectly they'd built a life together. The man she'd rejected for being a nobody was now somebody extraordinary, not because of his wealth, but because of his character, his integrity, his capacity to love and be loved in return. As the evening ended and Victoria helped clean up, the remnants of success, she finally understood what she'd lost. It wasn't just Jake's money or status, it was Jake himself, his loyalty, his ambition, his ability to see the best in people. She'd had the love of a man who would become extraordinary, and she'd thrown it away for the illusion of instant gratification. Jake Morrison had built an empire, but more than that, he'd built a life worth living. He'd found a woman who saw his worth from the beginning, who supported his dreams, who became his partner in every sense of the word. And Victoria Sterling? She collected empty champagne glasses and finally, truly understood that some mistakes can't be undone, some chances can't be reclaimed, and some people are only meant to be cautionary tales in someone else's success story. As Jake and Elena left the gala that night, hand in hand, talking excitedly about their foundation's future, neither looked back. They were too busy building tomorrow to dwell on yesterday's discarded dreams. Victoria watched them go, alone with her regrets and the bitter knowledge that she'd once held everything she'd ever wanted and had been too blind to see it.